This is a CTV News special presentation. Tonight,
God save the King.
God save the King.
King Charles, ahead of his crowning glory.
The Queen really wanted to have a string of people waiting.
His Majesty's moment after decades in waiting.
To become your liege man of life and limb.
From the family fractures.
His mother had never hugged him.
They had nothing in common.
It was all so shocking.
To the cruelty of colonialism.
To this day, I'm still fighting.
King Charles, the Crown and the Quarrels. From London, here is Omar Sachedina.
Buckingham Palace will be the starting point for the royal procession to Westminster Abbey, with the King and Queen on a gilded carriage. Good evening, everyone. We are less than 48 hours away from that coronation ceremony. And even if you believe the House of Windsor is nothing but a house of cards, it's a family with strong bonds and occasionally strained ties. It has been a very long road to the throne for King Charles III. At the age of 74, he will be crowned. But it wasn't always in the lineage of the royal family tree for it to be his crown to wear. Before Charles, his mother Elizabeth became queen at the age of 25, after her father, King George VI, died of illness at just 56 years old. King George VI was never supposed to be king. He was given the title after his older brother, King Edward VIII, abdicated when he followed his heart and married the twice-divorced socialite Wallis Simpson. And so this is how Queen Elizabeth came to rule, and as firstborn, Charles will now become king. Charles has 3 siblings, Anne, Andrew, and Edward. None of them are in direct line to rule. Charles and his first wife, Diana, had 2 boys, William and Harry. It will be their eldest son, William, who is next in line, after Charles. Prince William married Catherine, and Prince Harry married Meghan. It is Prince William's 3 children who follow the lineage for the crown: George, then Charlotte, and then Louis. Harry would come next, and his children, Archie and Lilibet. Now, with the coronation of King Charles, it is another changing of the guard for the British monarchy. And over the next hour, we will explore the King's controversies and his greatest influence on how he is likely to rule. His mother, the only other sovereign most in the UK have ever known. With some perspective on their relationship, I'm joined now by CTV's chief international correspondent, Paul Workman. Paul, certainly a lot of anticipation and excitement is building.
Oh, totally, and Charles waited a very long time for this day, Omar. He was 4 and already heir to the throne when his mother was crowned. His moment as sovereign of the realm has finally arrived.
A changing of the guard and a changing of the generations. From queen and mother to king and son. A monarchy that has endured in all its spectacle and glory, the living relic of a once mighty empire where its subjects still sing, "Long to reign over us." So then, to a new royal era, all rise for Charles III.
Her Royal Highness is the proud and happy mother of a prince, the infant boy who will one day be king.
Joyous days for a nation emerging from what Churchill called the strife and storm of war, celebrating the birth of a future king in a heady glow of optimism. A young Elizabeth told her family, "I am going to be his mother, not the nurses." 3 years later, her father was dead, she was queen, and duty took over, with telling effect on her firstborn son.
The Queen definitely put duty ahead of her children, but she didn't know what else to do. She was crowned in the eyes of God, and she promised that she would do her duty to her people.
The young prince was by nature timid and sensitive, quick to cry, craving his mother's approval and perhaps her hugs.
There absolutely is the famous example when the Queen returned from a very long tour. That shot, that image of the Queen shaking hands with her little son, is always contrasted with Princess Diana rushing to meet her two boys with her arms flung wide.
Diana fanned the flames by telling the world in various little chats and interviews that she thought the reason that her husband was so difficult and uptight was because that his mother had never hugged him. And at one time, I think Charles himself even said he doesn't remember his mother ever hugging him.
Sent off to a rigorous hard knocks boarding school, which he hated, the pain of childhood cruelly recounted in a 1994 biography describing his mother as cold and reserved.
Page 49. She, the Queen, was not indifferent so much as detached, deciding that in domestic matters she would submit entirely to the father's will. Prince Philip.
At the time, the Queen was very hurt by his criticism, and she used to say to her mother, you know, where have I gone wrong?
I think possibly he was the wrong child for that treatment.
When the Archbishop gently sets this splendid emblem on the Queen's head.
Suddenly a queen, crowned Elizabeth II, who would spend a historic 7 decades on the throne, the longest-serving British monarch ever.
Consecrated and dedicated to her life work by the solemn and hallowed ritual of coronation.
Charles remembers little of the day, fidgeting beside his beloved grandmother, who became a cherished presence in his life, while his real mother took up a greater calling.
I think she was a mother of her time, and in those days, aristocratic mothers didn't see much of their children.
I, Charles, Prince of Wales, do become your liege man of life and limb.
Charles, who first felt the weight and burden of a crown at the age of 20, taking his vow as Prince of Wales. Prince who waited through 5 more decades to inherit a second crown and the title sovereign. In his later years, with a single word, Charles gave voice to the kind of affection his mother always held back. On her Diamond Jubilee,
Your Majesty, Mummy, as a nation, this is our opportunity to thank you and my father for always being there for us, for inspiring us with your selfless duty and service, and for making us proud to be British.
As the decades moved on, of course, we wanted to see Mummy and her son.
and there was a glimpse of that as she lived on, training her son to take over, rewarding his patience with fond and rarely expressed approval on his 60th birthday.
As the Prince of Wales, our son approaches his own 60th birthday, may I say that we are both enormously proud to have been reminded here today of his personal contribution to this remarkable organization.
Out of his mother's long shadow to the heavy burden she passed on. From a young man who said he preferred his own company to an aging king who joked of himself as just an ordinary person in an extraordinary position.
In essence, Omar, King Charles is starting his reign at a very huge disadvantage, following the long shadow of his mother, who was almost universally popular in a way that he may never be.
And Paul, we know about King Charles III, but what do we know about the Charles that preceded him, the two Charles that preceded him?
Well, the first King Charles was born in 1600, and he suffered a terrible fate, Omar. He was beheaded in the middle of the English Civil War. Along came his son, King Charles II, who did somewhat better, although he was also captured and exiled out of the country country for a decade. So thus to King Charles III, who suffers the modern problems or faces the modern problems of the monarchy, keeping it together, for example. It's hoped, of course, that his fate is going to be much better than the first two Charles.
So much history tied up in that name. And we should also mention, Paul, that the procession will pass right by a statue of King Charles I, which, of course, was the monarch you mentioned that was beheaded, with anti-monarchists planning protests on Saturday.
That's right.
Paul, thank you so much. Appreciate it. And for that coronation procession, in the specially built grandstand behind me, there are 3,800 seats reserved for veterans, healthcare workers, and charities with links to the royal family. 354 uniformed cadet forces will watch from Admiralty Arch. And for the public, viewing areas line the Mall and Whitehall. But organizers are warning space is limited. And after the coronation ceremony, the procession will be in reverse, with the King and Queen going back to Buckingham Palace.
Still ahead tonight, in the shadow of Diana.
Diana was reconciled to the fact that Prince Charles and Camilla were an item.
King Charles, The Crown and the Quarrels continues after this. King Charles III, The Crown and the Quarrels. Here is Omar Sachedina.
The royal family's unofficial nickname is the Firm, and while Charles was born into his role, his sister and two brothers grew up with less certainty about their place in the family business. CTV's Genevieve Beauchemin is here with more on these complicated connections between royal siblings, and there is a lot of family drama, so many times, Jen, unfolding quite publicly.
Oh, that's right, Omar. You know, brothers and sisters offer unique insight into their families' quirks, and to Charles, that's Anne, Andrew, and Edward. And it seems even royal siblings evoke a mix of love, but also friction. This was a rare show of public unity. Charles with all three of his siblings together to mourn their mom, the Queen. But divided by scandals and royal rivalries that have rocked the House of Windsor. Yet once upon a time, the four royal children of Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip brought joy to their kingdom. Charles was not yet 2 years old when he was bestowed the title of Royal Big Brother to Anne. Anne and Charles grew up close. They forged a tight bond as toddlers when their mom became queen at just 25. Tabloids dubbed the princess Rebel Anne in her teens. By age 26, she was the first royal Olympian.
She was a no-nonsense kind of person and still is. She is so quintessentially a central element of the monarchy.
Now the Princess Royal is a senior advisor to the king, key in delicate family matters like that of their disgraced brother, Prince Andrew. Born in 1960, Andrew is 12 years younger than Charles. As a boy, he was known as a colorful character, adored, say royal watchers, by his mother.
There was something about Prince Andrew's personality that appealed to her, but Prince Andrew has had difficulty always fitting in. There's obviously some issues, what should we say, a lack of judgment.
And that has long put a strain on the relationship between Andrew and Charles.
It's better to have as much speed as possible because then you can break through the pressure wave.
The British press acclaimed Andrew for his service in the Royal Navy during the Falklands War, and he later took on the role of UK business ambassador. But then his reputation began to unravel. Tabloids had a field day with the collapse of his marriage to Sarah Ferguson, and then with details of sexual escapades and romantic links to glamorous women. In 2015, stunning allegations surfaced that would lead to an unprecedented fall from grace. A woman, Virginia Giuffre, says she was forced to have sex with the prince, trafficked by American sex offender Jeffrey Epstein when she was just 17.
He knows exactly what he's done, and I hope he comes clean about it.
In November 2019, Prince Andrew addressed the scandal in a shocking BBC Newsnight interview.
I have no recollection of ever meeting this lady. None whatsoever.
You don't remember meeting her?
No.
The prince denied the allegations but settled a lawsuit with Giuffre for an undisclosed sum in 2022.
I just wish to reiterate my focus is on my work.
His Royal Highness no more, the once cherished favorite son stripped of military titles and patronages by his own mother, the Queen. King Charles inherited the Andrew problem and continued the crackdown, reportedly after a series of meetings with his other siblings, ensuring there would be no way back into public life for the prince who had tarnished the family name. The last baby, Edward, was born when Charles was 15 and away at boarding school in Scotland, a lifetime apart as children. But now royal watchers say he's the bridge between siblings. Married more than 20 years, he and wife Sophie have become model working royals, and for that they've been rewarded. Edward now the Duke of Edinburgh, like his pa, and Sophie the Duchess. A token of fraternal trust for the baby in an uncommon family.
As coronation celebrations settle, there will be no rest for dutiful Anne. She will be heading to Moncton and Sussex, New Brunswick to celebrate the oldest continuously serving armoured regiment in the Canadian military. The Princess Royal's 23rd visit to Canada, Omar.
Yes, and not much rest at all. That tour kicking off on May 18th. Jen, thank you so much. Most of the siblings have something else in common, a shared experience with failed marriages. 3 out of the Queen's 4 children, Charles, Anne, and Andrew, have all divorced, while Edward and Sophie are, of course, still together. Charles and Camila have now been married for 18 years, which is longer than he was married to Diana. And yet so much of his life in the public eye has been defined by that relationship. CTV's Joy Malbin joins me now with a look at Charles, the husband. And Joy, we have to remember that this is not just Charles's coronation, but also Camila's.
Yeah, it is. Yes, Omar. I mean, some of the biggest controversies for King Charles have been about his love life. His relationships have been tabloid fodder for years. But in the end, he followed his heart and married the person he truly loved.
There was a time when Charles, now king, was the dashing Prince of Wales, the most sought-after bachelor on the planet. Linked to presidents' daughters and rich aristocrats, and yes, Camila, a young woman he met at a polo match in the summer of 1970. With her, he was smitten, but Charles wasn't ready for marriage, so she moved on, marrying Andrew Parker Bowles, a military officer who once played on Prince Charles's polo team. 6 years later, Britain's future king would find his much younger bride, the world enthralled with the 20-year-old Lady Diana Spencer.
After 13 dates, he proposed to her and they decided to get married, but they had nothing in common. It was huge pushing on him to get married and have an heir. The Queen really wanted to have a string of people waiting, so she knew that the royal family would continue after her.
And I suppose in love. Of course. Whatever in love means.
What should have been the easiest question of all, he couldn't answer. Royal watchers blame pressure and a royal rule from the past.
At the time, in the 70s, a woman who was going to marry an heir to the throne had to be a virgin. So she went to see a doctor and was examined. I mean, it sounds horrendous, doesn't it?
As she walked down the aisle in a ceremony sold as a fairy tale wedding, watched by millions, it was, in a word, spectacular. The marriage itself, not so much. On the face of it, it seemed like the perfect royal marriage, a modern monarchy, a handsome prince and princess who would welcome 2 beautiful boys, the eldest who would also be king one day.
Prince Charles went with her to the hospital, which was the first time an heir to the throne had done that. And she was in labour for 16 or 17 hours, and he was there all the time. She had a very difficult pregnancy. She was very sick. She had this eating disease where she was making herself sick. So altogether it was very, very difficult for her. He didn't know how to reach her.
We all know now there was no happy ending. When the marriage fell apart, Diana controlled the narrative. And in a 1995 bombshell BBC interview, she famously told the world,
"Well, there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded."
Diana entered a family, ironically, that she thought where she would never divorce, where she ended up marrying someone who loved somebody else.
There were tell-alls, secret recordings, scandalous headlines, throwing the monarchy into turmoil before the inevitable.
It is announced from Buckingham Palace that, with regret, the Prince and Princess of Wales have decided to separate.
Friends say Charles had never really stopped loving Camilla.
Diana was reconciled to the fact that Prince Charles and Camilla were an item. It made her anxious, but at the same time, by now, she would have accepted that she was going to be queen.
Camilla went from mistress to alleged homewrecker. Diana swapped scandal for a selfless pursuit, and always the loving mother. Until that tragic car crash in Paris, chased by hordes of photographers, her death at the hands of a drunk driver.
I always believed the press would kill her in the end. But not even I could imagine that they would take such a direct hand in her death, as seems to be the case.
She was the people's princess, and that's how she will stay, how she will remain in our hearts and in our memories forever.
That sense of loss felt far and wide. Suddenly, Charles was no longer the loveless husband, now a widower. There was sympathy for the now single father, caring for 2 wounded boys. And in the wake of very public grief for the king-to-be, there would be a renewed chance at royal love.
There she was, in his heart and in his soul, that he couldn't actually give it up.
When we return, Camilla's comeback.
He's literally got the cake and eating it too. He has everything that he's ever wanted.
Stay with us. King Charles III, the Crown and the Quarrels.
2 years after Princess Diana's tragic death, Charles and Camilla were photographed together, leaving a birthday party at the Ritz, reintroducing the woman he has loved his entire life to the public once more.
She really listened to him and she understood him. He'd never met anybody else who actually had that effect on him.
Thrust into the spotlight, it would be another 6 years before Charles would marry his future queen, Camilla.
Did he get down on one knee to propose?
Friends say the couple wanted to wait until William and Harry were older before they went. Accepting Camilla wasn't easy. Public fury at the other woman blamed for shattering the royal love story hasn't faded completely.
Lovely flowers. Look, they're matchmade.
I think they warmed to her because they could see that she was working very hard on the charities, that she felt very strongly about her duty to the monarchy.
How many more women must be harassed, raped, or murdered before we truly unite to forge a violence-free world?
Camilla would never be a darling like Diana, but after 17 years, she won her prince against all odds.
They have a sort of silent way of communicating, a look in the eye. They have the same sense of humour, and they make each other laugh a great deal.
The royal family would eventually come around, Queen Elizabeth recognizing she made Charles happy, and her wish that Camilla should be known as Queen Consort when Charles becomes king. Charles is said to be more open, mingling with the people, and there by his side is Camilla. In the end, maybe the truth is there's nothing fairy tale about it. For this one-time prince who may have thought he'd never find true happiness, Charles will soon wear the crown along with his queen in a marriage fit for a king.
And Omar, the palace has already dropped the title queen consort, now calling her, yes, Camilla, Queen Camilla. It's on the coronation invitations, and while that has raised a few eyebrows, it was at the king's insistence to legitimize Camilla's role as his wife.
All right, Joy Melvin, thank you so much for this tonight. It's worth noting that when Charles and Camilla made it official in 2005, they chose not to have a church service, making the future king the first British royal to marry in a civil ceremony. A decidedly low-key affair when compared to his son William's wedding to Kate in 2011, which is still the most watched event in history, with an estimated audience of 2 billion worldwide. Years later, Prince William admitted it was very difficult not to have his late mother at his wedding, saying he wished she could have met Kate. After the death of Diana, William and Harry became closer to their father, at least for a while. CTV's Danielle Himanjan joins me now, and Charles is really somebody who did try to prepare his sons for the spotlight, Danielle.
He did, and Charles has had to navigate some difficult waters, like many, but with a blinding public spotlight. As king, all eyes will be on Charles and both his sons, and both will be there, the heir and the spare. Royal babies are always a source of public fascination, but this one was a first. The year was 1982, and never before had an heir to the British throne been born in a hospital. The new father shared his excitement at seeing what he called a small creature that belonged to them, even though he seemed to belong to everyone else. From day one, Prince William was the focus of intrusive curiosity and scrutiny. A future king whose mother was hands-on and fiercely protective, and whose father has been described by insiders as a remote figure.
So I always assumed that he would be perhaps cold and distant because his mother was that way. And I'm not surprised that he ended up being that way as well.
Prince William was forced to grow up quickly. Enduring loss, gaining responsibility, he found love and began forging his own path.
He's also a minor revolutionary, actually. I think he might change the monarchy more than Charles will.
Like his father, he became part of the Royal Air Force, but also used his wings to help others.
It's rewarding when I come here to do this job, and I look forward to coming here every day, and the fact that I love working in a team, and that's something that my other job doesn't necessarily do.
And on the day he'll become King William, many will be drawing comparisons to his late grandmother.
He takes as role model the late Queen, not his father. He's jumped a generation there. He doesn't do things the way his father did. Charles is full of his own passions and his own ideas, and I think William is more of a listener.
Does William have a temper?
Yes, next question. I mean, yeah.
And so on Coronation Day and the days that follow, many eyes will be on the king and the king-to-be, as a father and son inherit the family business.
King Charles recognizes that it's King William who will really properly inherit the issues of still making the royal family and the monarchy relevant.
Coming up next, sibling revelry to rivalry.
We all thought William and Harry were pretty close.
When King Charles, the Crown and the Quarrels continues. King Charles III, the Crown and the Quarrels.
By 1984, Charles and Diana were back on the steps of London's St. Mary's Hospital. Henry Charles Albert David was to be called Prince Harry. But as he grew up, he would also come to be referred to, even by members of his own family, as the Spare. a one-letter word that defined him as a royal and deeply affected him as a son.
There is a lot of resentment towards King Charles, there's a lot of resentment towards Prince William, but there's also a lot of feeling of someone who was damaged, someone who wasn't paid attention to.
Harry grew up with all the usual royal rites of passage. Boarding school, he joined the military and served in Afghanistan twice. He became an advocate, a humanitarian. He fell in love with American actress Meghan Markle. The royal resentment exposed in a shocking Netflix series.
I was terrified. I didn't want history to repeat itself.
And even more would come out in Harry's best-selling book.
He's writing not just for us, but specifically to them, saying to them, this is what I went through, this is what you didn't pay attention to, and these are the consequences of your actions.
At any point did you think, oh my God, I can't believe he went there?
Every other page.
About his father, Harry wrote, he had trouble communicating, trouble listening, trouble being intimate face to face. And when the time came to break the news that Harry's mother, Princess Diana, had died, his recollection, heartbreaking. What I do remember with startling clarity is that I didn't cry, not one tear. Pa didn't hug me.
When he was telling Prince Harry that his mother had died, he patted him on the knee. And yes, he did call him darling boy, but I don't think a hug would have gone amiss in that particular occasion.
Also revealed a claim that as teenagers, both Harry and William begged their father not to marry his longtime mistress, now Queen Camilla. Charles has to walk a tightrope, doesn't he?
Charles will never add fuel to the fire, but he's definitely going to be hurt by Spare, by some of the things that were written about him, and particularly about his wife Camilla as well. Those things will sting him. Those things will cut deep.
I wasn't being thrown to the wolves, I was being fed to the wolves.
In airing royal dirty laundry, Harry has also revealed a not-so-shiny sibling relationship. One altercation allegedly tied to unflattering comments William made about Harry's new wife, Meghan.
We all thought William and Harry were pretty close, pretty good brothers, and it turned out that Harry had this resentment for a long time about his brother, and the relationship wasn't so great.
Harry, now with an ally, has put his own family first, ahead of the royal family.
I wonder what would have happened to us had we not got out when we did.
Harry and Meghan could have been that perfect bridging point, that perfect gap between the younger generation and the royal family.
And while no longer a working royal, his roots are still as prince. Harry will be there to see his father crowned king.
But I do think the coronation will be the icebreaker that will take them towards reconciliation. And I wouldn't say it's fractured, I wouldn't say it's broken, I would just say that it's on ice.
And Omar, we know Harry will be attending without his wife Meghan, who is staying home in California with the kids. He'll be in and out of the UK within hours. So any one-on-one time with his father or his brother, very unlikely.
And we'll see what Harry's interaction is like with other members of his family. Danielle, thank you. And by the way, the Duchess of Sussex will be honored later this month at the 2023 Women of Vision Awards, which celebrates feminist changemakers. Meghan will receive her award on May 16th from Gloria Steinem, feminist trailblazer and founder of Ms. Magazine. Coronation Day is actually Archie's 4th birthday, so technically Charles is missing a family event as well. At 74, the new king is no longer a young man, but he is a guide for 5 grandchildren who represent the monarchy's future. Morella Fernandez is here with more on Charles as a grandfather, a role, Morella, he really seems to be relishing, and he certainly has softened in the past few decades.
He really does seem to have softened. I mean, he had a special bond, of course, with his own grandmother, the Queen Mum, and he seems now to hold that role as grandpa to his heart. And as he transitions to king, we may see more of that endearing side of him.
At an age when many try to slow down, the new king will see his royal responsibilities rev up.
There'll be an awful lot of weight on his shoulders, but he will deal with it because that's what he was brought up to do.
Charles will have to balance being the British monarch with being Grandpa Wales.
King Charles loves his grandchildren and is very sort of playful with them. But I think the most touching thing we've seen is Prince Charles and Prince Louis.
Louis. He's the cheeky one, he's really funny, so sweet.
While Louis snags the spotlight, it will be George, now 9, who will make history. He will serve as a page in Saturday's ceremony, the first future king with a role at a coronation.
I think it's wonderful that there will be 3 of them there, King Charles, Prince William and Prince George. I mean, it looks that the monarchy is strong and solid. You see that Prince George is gradually learning how to behave in public.
Some of that is thanks to younger sister Charlotte, the princess, next in line for the throne.
You can see she's a very responsible young girl, sometimes quite funnily, because when they were there for the funeral in Windsor, she was nudging George every time he had to bow. And if she sees little Louis doing something wrong, she tells him straight away. She's very keen on doing the right thing.
And while Prince William's children are most often in the public eye, King Charles is also grandpa to Archie and Lilibet, the little ones of Harry and Meghan. Harry remains on the outs with the rest of the family. That causes deep strain. And while the Duke and Duchess of Sussex have rejected royal life, they have no issue with adopting the titles, including Prince and Princess, for their children. Charles has met his youngest grandchildren, but a bond across the Atlantic is a challenge. Archie and Lilibet are growing up in California, raised as Americans.
They can't really connect to them because I think they've seen them twice and just for a few minutes. I think it's very sad for King Charles. You can't accept them if they're not there.
He loves the family. I think he tries to keep the family together. He likes the traditions as well, and as we all do.
And while the tradition of the royal family carries on, King Charles has a big task ahead, seeking ways to keep the monarchy relevant to younger generations.
I worry about your grandchildren and everybody else's grandchildren as well as my own. And it just seemed to me that I couldn't possibly face my grandchildren or yours at the end of the day when we've completely mucked up the whole of our environment.
Charles has advocated for protecting the environment for decades, but as king will need to carefully advocate as he can't let his personal views affect public policy. And Omar, Charles has 5 grandchildren, Camila has 5, so they've got that window into the younger generation.
All right, we'll see what the future holds. Marilla, thank you so much. In the present, opinions are both divided and definitive. At a match on Sunday in Glasgow, this spontaneous chant made it clear how these fans feel about King Charles.
When we come back, polling the people.
I like him.
Why do you like him?
Why do I like him? That's a good question.
He works very, very hard. He cares about the people of the Commonwealth.
Stay with us. King Charles III, the Crown and the Quarrels. Here is Omar Sachedina.
The coronation of Charles marks a new chapter in history, but it's hardly turning the page on the past. He is a well-known figure who may struggle to make the monarchy relevant to a younger generation. He also takes the throne in a much more cynical age than his mother. Anne-Marie Medawake has been looking into whether his subjects think he's the right man for the role, and there has been a lot of debate on this end.
Yeah, well, back in Canada, polls are showing that most people don't want him as head of state. Here in London, the coronation bunting is up, and so are King Charles' approval ratings. An Ipsos poll last week showed 57% of people here believe he's doing a good job as the new monarch.
For the British, traditional bunting is a matter of patriotic pride, a united front in the United Kingdom. This city, this country is getting ready for a celebration not seen in more than 70 years.
It's a once in, will it be once in my lifetime? Probably not, because of the age of King Charles.
The new king may not have a long reign or capture hearts like his mother, the Queen.
He's got a tough act to follow, really.
but he has fans old and new.
Because he loves nature so much, we've been making some flowers to put up a display on top of the library so King Charles can see.
As a prince, a young husband, father, and heir to the throne, Charles' popularity has had its highs. Even through the turmoil of the 1990s, the royal rankings put him top 3. The Queen Mum was favorite, then the Queen, and then Prince Charles. In a 1991 Ipsos Mori poll, 8 out of 10 residents thought Charles would make a good king. But after Camila Gate, his divorce to Diana, and her tragic death, the faith in Charles faded. And by 1997, that number drastically fell. Less than half believed in Charles. He turned to his work.
He had no choice but to be patient, so he went off on his own path. So he made these projects. He just worked at what he really, really cared about, preserving historic buildings, preserving churches. I mean, it was all about preserving.
Charles took on more than 500 engagements a year for 2 decades.
And he works very, very hard. He cares about the people of the Commonwealth.
Now, royal fans will line the new king's procession to Westminster Abbey.
I like him.
Why do you like him?
Why do I like him? That's a good question.
And I think he's going to be great. I think he's loving, and I think he's, involved.
Hopefully he'll be as good as his mother.
King Charles may draw crowds for his crowning, but he still struggles with his popularity. He might be head of the firm, but he sits in the middle of the pack when it comes to the public's favorite royals. Right now, he's behind the Prince and Princess of Wales and his grandkids. That's a ranking he's going to want to improve, even after all this bunting comes down.
And we already know that he won't have as much time as his mother did, Anne-Marie, to build the bond with the people. Sure. Thank you so much. And Canadians are split. Still, the Prime Minister is expected to be here. Justin Trudeau will be among the dignitaries inside the Abbey for the coronation. U.S. First Lady Dr. Jill Biden will also be attending, while her husband, U.S. President Joe Biden, will not. French President Emmanuel Macron is confirmed, as is European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, Prince Albert of Monaco, and the new First Minister of Scotland, Humza Yousaf, a self-avowed Republican.
After the break, dark royal secrets.
The Crown, they need to know what they have done.
Even Elizabeth II did not want to acknowledge or apologize for slavery.
King Charles, the Crown and the Quarrels, continues after this. King Charles III, the Crown and the Quarrels. Here is Omar Sachedina.
The Mall leading to Buckingham Palace is lined tonight with the flags of the Commonwealth ahead of the coronation parade on Saturday. And King Charles is the head of state for some of those nations, bonded by a British Empire that no longer exists.
With the crown, Charles inherits a commonwealth of 56 nations and 2.5 billion people, more than half of them under the age of 30. Britain used to rule nearly all of them.
How well Britain can hold this is of enormous importance for the future.
Canada has always been special to the royal family. In Queen Elizabeth's 70-year reign, she visited 22 times.
Someone has just simply ran up and gave the Queen a bouquet.
Charles has been coming to Canada since 1970.
You've no idea what a particular pleasure it was for me to be released on my own on a visit to Canada.
Very interesting indeed, I must say. Bloody cold.
Over the decades, the monarchy has made it its mission to engage with people.
Let's give them a proud South African welcome to the Duke and Duchess.
And connections with younger generations are critical to its survival.
I am here with you as a mother, as a wife, as a woman of color, and as your sister.
Meghan was someone who was helpful in terms of representing the future of the modern monarchy. I think the monarchy missed an opportunity by alienating Meghan and Harry.
While King Charles works to repair family ties, he must also mend broken relationships between the monarchy and those within the Commonwealth who have been marginalized.
To this day, I'm still fighting. I'm still getting to see those hidden spots.
Mary Jane McCallum was taken from her home at the age of 5 and sent to Guy Hill Residential School in the Pas, Manitoba. She is now a Canadian senator.
I was forced to play piano for 7 years, and there was a lot of physical abuse that happened. Very violent.
So were you slapped? Were your hands?
Yeah, with a stick and my head.
And your head too?
Yep.
Often?
Often. And I remember playing and crying. The Crown, they need to know what they have done and contributed to and how they're going to make amends.
Charles has begun to acknowledge this history.
We will not forget that the deep connections between the United Kingdom and the Inuit go back more than 400 years.
A 2017 royal tour to Nunavut was welcomed. But later, there was resentment for the reaction to a traditional throat-singing performance.
It's ignorant. It's ignorance, because they didn't appreciate the art of throat singing.
5 years later, Charles and Camila visited Canada's north again.
Reflecting honestly and openly on one of the darkest aspects of history.
The royal family has also begun to come to terms with a history of colonialism, visiting nations in the Commonwealth that are embracing their culture and autonomy. Some of those visits have come with controversy.
Even Elizabeth II did not want to acknowledge or apologize for colonialism, for slavery.
Now, throughout the Commonwealth, Charles must acknowledge what his mother did not.
The links between the monarchy and the transatlantic slave trade go back all the way to the 16th century and the reign of Queen Elizabeth I. A significant chunk of the royal wealth stemmed from customs derived from slave labor. They are creating a slave empire, and they are building their wealth and their power and consolidating it over time.
What the legacy of slavery has been and what that means for us going forward is an important conversation to have.
As I continue to deepen my own understanding of slavery's enduring impact.
If I were him, I would be thinking very much about my legacy as a monarch in the time that he has and putting his mark on history in a way that can make a difference in people's lives now.
Facing the future, King Charles has made a new pledge to Commonwealth nations.
If we are to leave the world better than we found it, we must be bold with our ambition, decisive with our actions, and united in our effort.
There's a real opportunity to be a leader in an organization where you don't have great power rivalries.
Unlike the UN or the G7, the Commonwealth can make valuable decisions without China, Russia, or the US.
It has 1/3 of the world's population, and it has a $13 trillion market. And in the Commonwealth, Canada actually has a chance to lead.
Now, a new era for a king and a Commonwealth of Nations.
And when King Charles and Queen Camilla are crowned on Saturday, we will have complete coverage beginning at 3 a.m. Eastern, which is midnight in BC. Hope you'll join us, bright and early or late, depending on where you are. The first coronation in 70 years will be a historic moment for the United Kingdom, for Canada, and the rest of the Commonwealth. But it will also be the start of a new era in one family's royal legacy. I'm Omar Sachedina. Good night, and thank you for watching.